So after that serenity prayer, I think we could go home now. We're pretty much done. That's the most important thing. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. My home group is Brick Lane Big Book Study. My date of sobriety is 24th of July, 1993. Not my doing. Let's be very aware of that. And the topic of this session is the higher power. And as can be predicted, anything about the higher power, 4/5 of the people in the room are women. Men, my experience in AA, tend to run away from that topic and the women tend to run towards it. So this is absolutely on par with my experience. And I don't have any special expertise. I'm not a minister of religion. I'm none of those things. I happen to simply be an alcoholic who's here to share some experience, and we're going to have some questions and answers as well to open up the discussion a little bit. It happens to be my turn today. Next year it could be your turn. That's the democracy of AA. We each take a turn on this. Just to get an idea of where people are with the notion of a higher power, could you put your hands up? Anyone who believes that there is a higher power, that a higher power exists? Very good. How many people believe in a higher power? And keep your hands up if you believe you have an active relationship with a higher power. So it's slightly different. So do I believe that there is one? Do I believe in one? Do I have a relationship with one? Who's a bit on the fence about the higher power thing? Some hands. Does anyone absolutely not believe in the higher power? Which is fine if you do. Anyone absolutely no? And it's interesting. I've been to a number of atheists and agnostics meetings over the years, and they're great. If you want to hear people talk about God, go to an atheists and agnostics meeting. If you don't want to hear anything about God, go to a regular AA meeting. Because people are too frightened of saying the word God in case the newcomers are frightened. And if someone mentions God, normally someone else rushes in to damage limit and indicate, well, it's just a power greater than yourself and so on. Before getting on to the question of God or a higher power, I think we have to understand, or I have to understand, why it's even a question in AA, why the programme even has the notion of a higher power. One of the problems, I think, is that we have scrolls? Mercifully, there are no scrolls showing the steps and the traditions. Because we have the scrolls up showing the steps, and newcomers will come in, as I did, and I read the steps, and before I know anything about alcoholism, before I know anything about AA, suddenly, literally 20 words in, we're talking about God. And I know nothing at this point except, this is apparently about God. I was very addled when I first got to AA, which was January 1993. And I saw the scrolls, I read the stuff about God, and I assumed it was left over from something else. I didn't really connect it with AA or alcoholism. I missed the word alcohol, just saw God and thought, well, that's something else. And I was shocked to discover that AA did cover the question of God. The reason why I need a higher power is very simply this. I'll give an example. I first got sober in 1990 when I was 18. And I was sober for 3 months. And I got sober for very, very good reasons. I was literally losing my mind. My relationship with reality was strained. I was physically ill. I was mentally ill as a direct result of the sheer quantity of alcohol I was tipping down my throat on a daily basis. So I stopped, and I successfully stopped for 3 months. But I started again. I didn't start because I was having a bad time. I didn't start because I was having a bad day. I didn't start because of emotions. I didn't start because anyone pressured me to. I was in a situation, I thought a drink would be nice, so I went and bought a bottle, brought it back, and we all had a drink. Very ordinary thing for an 18-year-old to do. There was absolutely no thought, there was absolutely no consideration of what the consequences were. There was no trigger, just boom, suddenly one day, a drink seemed like a good idea. I can't do anything about the effect of alcohol on my system. So the only thing I can do is stay away from a drink one day at a time. However, I, with a capital I at the beginning of the sentence, I cannot stay away from a drink. I am attracted to a drink. Not all the time, and that's why it's tricky. I was talking to a friend yesterday, an alcoholic like me, and I said, do you think you've been at risk of drinking over the last 9 months? And he said, I haven't had a thought of a drink. And so that's a different question. You're presuming that to be at risk of drinking, you have to be thinking about drinking. I wasn't on the day I slipped in 1990 and on all of the other slips between then and 1993. I wasn't thinking about drinking until I was, and once I was thinking about drinking, it was too late. No warning sign. You don't get a little message through. You're going to have a drink in 6 weeks' time. Pull your socks up. Do something about it. By the time I realise there's a problem, it's too late. It's just like walking on ice. And I have had the misfortune to be walking on ice which was cracking. I lived in a very icy country many years ago. And I was very lucky because once you hear the ice cracking, it may well be too late. We scarpered back to the shore and we did survive, and then the ice collapsed into the water. But by the time you hear the cracking, it's luck whether you make it back to the shore. With me and alcohol, by the time I start thinking about drink as being a good idea, it might well be too late. This is why there is no point in telling newcomers or whoever else, if you feel like a drink, go to a meeting, call someone, read the book, whatever. Because as soon as I'm thinking about alcohol as being a potential good idea, as being an option, I'm already insane. If I'm insane, I do not have the ability to take sane actions and follow sane directions. So I need something to swoop in at that point the thought of a drink occurs and simply stop me. And that's what a higher power is. And what we could do, Libby, next year Libby's going to be doing the talk and I'm going to be doing the pens and paper, but Libby's going to be helping me today. Any questions about higher power, God, spirituality, AA, recipes, just anything you've got a question about, put the question on a piece of paper. There are some pens there as well. Libby will collect as well. And then in about 20 minutes, we'll start looking at questions. So a higher power. What I was encouraged to do, and I still think this is very useful, is throw away any existing idea of what God is, of what a higher power is, throw the whole thing away and start with a blank sheet of paper. If you had a house and it just looked wrong, it was an old house, and you had a design for a new house, and you wanted to change it brick by brick, you'd have an incredibly hard time to change the old house into a new house. What they would do is simply raise the old house to the ground, prepare the soil, put the foundations in, and build the new house in the same space. And that's exactly what I had to do with the relationship with a higher power. I was brought up with sort of Common or Garden Church of England. I attended all sorts of religious things for various reasons. It wasn't forced upon me. No theology was forced upon me. I was exposed to it. I concluded it was rubbish with my great knowledge at the age of 14, my great thought about it. I assessed the situation, decided it was rubbish. And I was a very militant atheist. I was dismissive of anyone that believed in God. I thought they were soft in the head. I was reduced to considering the question of a higher power by alcohol, by the fact that by July 1993, I was taking all of the AA actions, or most of the AA actions that I was being asked to take. I was going to meetings. I was going to a lot of meetings. I was going to 3 meetings a day. I was talking to people endlessly. They said, "You're as sick as your secrets," and I took this to heart and told everyone everything. Whether or not it was appropriate, whether or not they were interested, whether or not they were listening intently or backing away with an alarmed look on their face. I was doing a lot. I was reading AA literature, and I got to a point where whenever I woke up in the morning, I did not know whether I would get to bed sober that night. It was just, by this point, a lottery. And it wasn't for lack of my effort. A higher power. Higher than what? Higher than me. That's it. I needed the strength to stay sober. Regardless of what my mind was doing, I needed the strength to take sober actions in the place of drinking, regardless of what my mind was doing, regardless of my emotions. I did not have that strength. I therefore needed strength. The higher power is simply, for me, at the starting point, a word for, in a sense, that strength. Now, this question of, does this strength, this power, does it exist, is the first question. I don't need to ask whether I believe in it until I answer the question, do I believe that it exists? There's a difference between believing that Keir Starmer exists and believing in Keir Starmer. These are 2 distinct questions. I have no opinion on this question, but he's a figure that most people will be familiar with. You'll know whether or not you believe he exists. You'll know whether or not you believe in him. Different questions. So take the question, does a higher power exist? Does a strength exist? And we're not worried about the creation of the universe or the Trinity or anything like that. Is there a strength which can prevent an alcoholic like me from drinking, regardless of what they think, regardless of what they feel? And I looked at my home group, Exhibit A, Maureen, 17 years sober. This is evidence for the existence of God. Maureen was Exhibit A. because I identified with her drinking, I identified with her as a person. She was someone who had not been able to stay sober on her own. She did not have the strength, but she had acquired the strength. That was Exhibit A. Exhibit B was Sue, who was 30 years sober. Exhibit C was Doug, who was 10 years sober. And I looked round the room, and it was full of exhibits, as in a court case, evidence that a power existed. Now, what was interesting as well, there were people, and I won't say the names, but there were people there who, like me, were bouncing in and out of AA. So people who had been going to AA in some cases for decades, but had never put together more than a few days or weeks of sobriety. I, at that point, had been struggling to stay sober for 3 years, others maybe 10 years in that position. So these are examples of people who have not found that strength available to them, apparently. So the question I started to ask people, why is it that some people have found this strength and others haven't? What I was told, and I think it's pretty accurate, is that it is available to anyone, but a choice must be made. And the choice that had to be made was, first of all, to admit defeat, and then secondly, to take action. Now, the admission of defeat means to look at the results of my life and say, did I plan those results? As I was being dragged, quite literally, off the road by the policeman on the 24th of July 1993 and taken into custody and put in the police cells, I think I would have concluded this today has not gone to plan. This was not what I sought. This was not my ideal for the day, as I was cleaning the sick off my shirt. Looking more broadly at my life, nothing was as I wanted it to be. I couldn't work, I couldn't study, my mind no longer worked. I was very preoccupied with death and suicide, even more than is the case for an average 21-year-old. I had failed. Now, in a sense, I'd admitted I'd failed a lot earlier. But what I hadn't admitted was that my perception, my understanding of my situation must be wrong, or I wouldn't have failed. That what I didn't recognise was my life was the result of everything I believed, thought, and did. My first sponsor, Doug, I told him once, I'm very depressed. And he said, of course you're depressed. Your life is depressing. That's how you designed it. If you're going to not be depressed, you'll have to live differently. You'll have to believe different things. You'll have to think different things. You'll have to do different things. And to do that, I have to admit that the things I believe are wrong. The things I'm thinking are wrong. The things I'm doing are wrong. Maybe not all of them, but enough to destroy my life. And clearly, I was not able to discern what was right and wrong in my own beliefs, thinking and behaviour, or I would have fixed it by now. So not only was I wrong, I was someone who could not find their own way to what is right. And I frankly needed to be told. Now, Over time, my ability to think has returned and I can make up my own mind guided by a higher power now. But in my first year, I was not to be trusted with my life. And as soon as I stopped trusting myself with my life, I stopped relapsing. Or rather, I stopped drinking again. To relapse presumes one has recovered. I had not recovered. I was simply having breathers between drinks. Well, you need a rest. You need a break occasionally, don't you? All gets a bit much. So, a higher power, the starting point is recognizing that there is a strength that is available. And that there are two requirements. Number one, that I give up running my life myself, according to my own thinking. And secondly, to adopt the system presented by the AA program and the fellowship of AA, which is therefore not dependent on any one individual. It's dependent on the starting point, trusting the fellowship as a whole. So if any one person fails or disappears or drinks, I'm fine. If my sponsor drinks, I'm fine. If my home group folds, I'm fine, because there is the rest of the fellowship available. Next. And I had to say next a couple of times with sponsors when they drank. When I had sponsors who drank, someone said to me, "Does that not shake your faith in the AA program?" And I said, no, because I was doing the things he told me to do and I stayed sober. He was not doing the things that he was telling me to do and he got drunk. So I could see there was a system in operation here and the system was working. So coming to believe in a power greater than myself was seeing that there was a strength available, and it appeared to be available to anyone who would surrender and take action. And it would not be available if the person did not surrender and or did not take the action. And someone once described me as like a little tugboat, because whenever they suggested something to me, I would say, but. I started to get well when I said, yes, thank you, I'll do that, and then doing it. And I was told to judge the actions by the results you get from the actions, not by whether they seem to you to be a good idea. Because my alcoholism will never think that your suggestions are a good idea. When you bring in the exterminator to get rid of the cockroaches, you do not ask the cockroaches what they think of the operation. If I have admitted complete defeat, I should not be asking myself for advice on whether or not to take the advice which is being given to me by people who are demonstrably sober and thriving in their lives. And my belief in a higher power flowed from taking actions I didn't believe in, because the people who were taking them and suggesting them were doing significantly better than me. And I started to realize I was making very swift progress. Even within 6 weeks, I had a message to carry which I hadn't had at 1 week and 2 weeks. And I was encouraged to turn around everything I was learning and the successes and turn those into shares in meetings so that I could really create my own story as I went along by trying to help other people who were just at that point 1 week sober, 2 weeks sober, 3 weeks sober. I could see that it was working. I could now not just see the strength in you to stay sober, but I could see the strength in me. And the thought of a drink would occur to me on a regular basis in those first few weeks, but it now seemed easy to simply not do it and to go to meetings and to talk to people. Going to a meeting will not stop me from having a drink. Starting to form a relationship with a higher power will give me the strength to do that very thing, like go to a meeting. The sanity starts to be restored first before I take those right actions. The ability to call someone when I feel terrible or feel like a drink, that ability itself is a gift from the higher power. The recollection that calling someone is an option is a gift from a higher power. It's not that I go and do the right thing and the higher power shows up. The higher power shows up. That gives me the direction of what to do, call someone, and the strength to do it, actually go through with it. And I remember once in a phone box in Chelsea with those green phone cards from the early 90s. And I used up almost the whole phone card. I think I was 17 calls in before I got someone who didn't have an answer machine. The strength to do that, to make those 17 calls, was given to me. Because on the 24th of July 1993, I did not have that strength. I had the phone list in my pocket, I had the phone card, there were phone machines everywhere. But it didn't occur to me on the way to the pub to call anyone. So I needed to start mentally reaching out to a higher power in order to take those actions to drag me away from the shore where the waves of alcoholism were threatening to catch me. So I could see a higher power operating in your life. I could feel the effect. I could see the effect in my own life. It's not a short leap to then say, if I'm receiving a gift, there is a giver. It's in the nature of a gift to have, well, there are three elements. There's the gift itself, there is the recipient, and there is the giver. If there is a gift, the strength to stay sober. If there is a recipient, me, there must be a giver. Now, I still had very strong objections to a higher power who was, as it were, personal. I had a bloodless, personless sense of a higher power. It was simply a spirit or a force. There was still only one person in the room, and that was me. And in my first 10 years, I did okay. I stayed sober, just about. I did a lot of service for a period. I can't tell the whole story, there isn't time. But I never reached a position of complete peace. I tried for many years to have a relationship with a higher power that was abstract, that was not personal. And if you can do it, my hat is off to you. Congratulations, I absolutely can't. I need a higher power, and this is for me, it may be true for some others too. I need a higher power I can talk to and who I believe can talk back. And who, when I speak, understands what I'm saying. Now, this doesn't imply any particular religion at all. I know lots of people who have a religion who do not talk to God or a higher power as a person in a personal way. They're very good at the religion itself. It may not require that direct addressing, but I need that. Why? I don't know. My job is to identify that I do. My life today, before I get on to the questions, and luckily we have a few, My life today, the first thing I do in the morning, I start to wake up about an hour and a half before I actually properly wake up. So I'm in and out of sleep. I go to bed early enough that I don't need an alarm. So I'm never very rarely overtired. I get enough sleep, which means I start to wake up slowly and naturally. And in that period, having trained myself to do this for many years, I talk to the higher power. That's all. I consider myself protected. I consider myself safe. There's a lot more to it. I could talk for hours about visualization and so on. But the simple idea of being in the presence of a power greater than myself, infinitely greater than myself, not just my little friend. The trouble is with the phrase, my higher power, my iPhone, my meetings, my big book, they're like my little dollies I'm keeping round me, my little things which belong to me. So when I say my higher power, it doesn't belong to me. I am it, so I belong to it. It was there first and is much bigger than me. I mean, I would say he myself, but I want to avoid controversy, so I'm saying it about the higher power, just to avoid that whole question, which I can't be bothered with. Much bigger than me, infinitely bigger than me, able to protect me. And I spend a long time in that condition in the morning, and I do the same when I'm getting ready for bed and when I'm going to sleep. What I do as I'm going to sleep, I haven't tried to go to sleep for donkey's years. What I do is I lie down and I talk to my higher power. And sometimes I fall asleep quickly and sometimes I don't, but the job is simply to hang out with my higher power. And sometimes it turns into praying for people, for situations. Sometimes it's simply enjoying being in a place of rest. One other thing before I get on to the questions. That's the beginning of the day and the end of the day. In between, my job is simply to do whatever I believe my higher power wants me to do. I'm a servant 24 hours a day. When it says in step 3, I made a decision to turn my will and life over to God, I really mean it today. It means it's not my life. I'm given back 24 hours to spend wisely, but it's not my life. I don't have a dog in the race. Some questions. Well, this is a good one. It's written in a red pen. Red means danger. So let's start. Let's start with that one. How do you keep the belief in a higher power? I think that's an incredibly good question because, as we're aware, it's not uncommon for people after 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years in AA to have a drink. And if one believes what is written in the AA literature, the reason might be that they've lost a connection with a higher power. And so to continue being a servant of the higher power, I must continue believing in a higher power. And so the question of continuing to believe in a higher power is key to the whole thing. And I think there are two aspects to this. The first aspect is, why would one cease to believe in a higher power in the first place? I don't know if any of you have read a newspaper or turned on the radio or turned on the television or looked, heaven forbid, at social media, as it likes to call itself. But there is not much talk of God. And when there is talk of God, it is sometimes distasteful and has little to do with our experience of a higher power in AA. As I go through the day, I have two occupations. Neither of them have anything to do with God. Neither of them have anything to do with recovery. no one I work with believes in God. Remotely. Everyone thinks the idea is comical. So to maintain a belief in something, surrounded by people who don't believe in it, or who are actively hostile towards it, I encounter people on occasion who are actively hostile towards it, and I keep my mouth shut, and I make them a cup of tea, and I give them a biscuit, and I hope they choke on it. No, I don't. I leave them to it. My other half, I hasten to say, is pretty much a card-carrying Irish communist. So, they're completely atheist, and we get on just fine. But this does pose a difficulty, because one of the lines in the Big Book which I adore is where it talks about keeping our feet on the ground, which is where our work is. What's my work? I need to look after myself, I need to fulfill my obligations, then I need to enjoy myself. Look after myself, fulfill my obligations, enjoy myself. God, the book tells us, wants us to be happy, joyous and free. That is an instruction. If I'm not happy, I'm doing something wrong. I can be happy even when things are very much not going my way. I was bereaved a couple of times in the last 18 months, an immediate family member and my best friend. But it was possible through those periods to be happy and joyful and free, even though those events had happened. I can have a full range of emotions, including all of the grief and so on, whilst having a baseline of happiness. It's the baseline of happiness, joy and freedom, which I think this programme offers. Now, to maintain that belief in a world which is working actively against that, I need to take some measures. Firstly, I'd like to think of myself as someone who is mentally and emotionally and psychologically and spiritually independent, but I'm not. I'm greatly affected by who I hang out with and who I spend time with. So I spend enough time each day, each week, in person, on the phone, in communication with people who also have a relationship with a higher power. And I read a lot and I listen. And the exposure to spiritual materials, of whether it's of a religious nature or a more abstract spiritual nature, it works, I believe, in seasons. There are seasons where, like in spring, all the nutrients have to be drawn up to produce the new growth. And then there are periods like winter where nothing is happening. At the moment, I can't read anything spiritual, but it's fine because I've got AA. And it will pass, and then at some point, I'll start reading and listening, and I will annoy everyone with all of the things that I'm reading and listening. But over the course of my recovery, I exposed myself to a lot of spiritual materials. And I was given a wonderful piece of advice many years ago, which is when you're unhappy, just baseline unhappy, you have problems which do not yield to the ordinary, everyday measures of AA's suggested actions. Pick up some spiritual literature which appeals to you, ask God to speak through it, and read until you feel better. You're not done until you feel better. And you think it's going to be 2 weeks, and you think it's going to be 8 hours. Actually, it's normally somewhere between half an hour and 40 minutes. You read a line and you think, aha, that's changed my perception of the situation, and you carry on. And after a few hours of this, maybe interspersed with other activities, what I start to do is realise that my perception of the situation is wrong. The best way to believe in the light on my bicycle is to pedal the bicycle to make the light come on. It's very hard to believe in something that you don't have experience of. And my belief about AA is that 2% of it is the first 11 steps, and 98% of it is the 12th step, in particular the part where I make efforts to carry the message to alcoholics, and there have been periods where I've done a lot of service carrying the message of AA to the outside world. At the moment, I feel called much more to do things in AA. But I can't tell you how important it has been for me to work with other alcoholics and a lot of other alcoholics over many years, and time again, seeing the program work in them is what reminds me that it works for me as well. And the perfect example this morning was I was talking to someone for about an hour about step 3 and the application of step 3 to a particular area of his life. And there is an area of my life where I woke up this morning badly needing a spiritual injection on step 3 in that area of my life. And everything I was saying to him about the application of step 3, in his case with work, I was secretly saying to myself about the area that I was struggling with. And at the end of it, I was fine. I don't know about what state he was in. He seemed docile at least, which is a good sign. He knows better than to argue. But the point is, sometimes literally nothing will work other than carrying the message to other alcoholics. Prayer, meditation, nothing. You go and work with an alcoholic, you're fine. You're good to go for another 24 hours. And then you pray for another alcoholic to show up the next day. Oh, very, very good question. What can I do if I cannot hear my higher power? I pray a lot, but I can rarely hear or see an answer from HP. I don't hear voices. Just to be very... Now, if you hear voices and it's working for you, good for you. I do not want to disturb you in that practice. If in doubt, look at what the book says. And pages 84 to 88 are the meat and potatoes of the practical instructions for how to activate a relationship with a power greater than myself. And it says we ask, just ask, for one of 3 things: inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision. Inspiration, spirit, thought, mind, decision, body. And at some level, I'm looking for knowledge of what? Very dull. God's will for me. What is that? What am I going to do today? So when I ask God for direction in the morning, I'm not listening for a voice. What I'm looking for is, I'm looking in the same place I would look for any thought, in my mind. If I don't pray, thoughts will occur to me. If I do pray, thoughts will occur to me. Now, the thought does not have a little bell that says, I'm from God. It's just a thought. There is no way of looking at a thought and knowing for certain that it comes from God. A friend of mine who is a historian talks about a particular country that invaded another country, and on the belt buckles of all of the soldiers it said, "God with us." Just because you think God is on your side does not mean that God is. Just because you think you're doing God's will does not mean you're doing God's will. I have it on reliable authority. But the point is that if I pray and I sincerely want to do the right thing, which is essentially what God's will is, that taking the right actions today, adopting the right attitude, I trust that if I pray, what comes down the tubes to me is more likely to be God's will than if it's not. So it's very simple. I simply say to God in the morning, what do you want me to do today? And whether you write down the answers with pen and piece of paper, or you use note software or task folders, it doesn't matter what method it is, but I organise what I'm doing today and this week and to an extent further into the future. And what happens? Thoughts occur to me. This needs to be done. That needs to be done. And God's will, I don't think, comes in the form of very concrete results like God wants me in 5 years' time to be doing this job in this country. The question is, what does God want me to do today? And at one point, many years ago now, the idea came to me, investigate doing this course. And I got 6 months into the course, and I was saying to God on a daily basis, what should I do? And I got the sense, simply a thought, I'm doing the wrong thing. I needed to investigate this to find it's the wrong thing, but it's the wrong thing. And 6 months in, I gave up. I don't know if that was right or wrong. I don't know if it was God's will. I'm not in a position to judge that. All I can do is report the method. And the method is simply ask God what to do and look in the same place, one's own mind, for inspiration, an intuitive thought or a practical decision, and get on with it. And my friend Tom says, the worst thing it can be is a terrible mistake. And if it's a terrible mistake, you admit it promptly, which means straight away, which really does mean straight away. Yeah. Let's have another look. If we become angry, rageful, disturbed, or insane, what's the best way to stop and access a higher power or God? That's another very good question. There's a line in 12 Steps and 12 Traditions where it says, it is a spiritual axiom that if I am disturbed, there is something wrong with me, with the way I'm looking at the situation. And so what I first of all want to do if I'm very disturbed is remove myself from the danger of saying something or doing something or basically opening my big fat mouth and causing a problem. When I'm not very well spiritually, I'm more likely to be a turtle than a skunk. I'm more likely to retreat than spray the poison everywhere. But I am capable of causing real problems when I'm upset. And there's another point in the big book where it says, if you're talking to someone and you get disturbed, it should be the privilege of either to say, I'm sorry I got heated, let's talk about this later. And so I first of all remove myself from the situation. When very disturbed, a couple of things are very helpful. Well, let's do a list. Okay, the first thing is to sit quietly somewhere and look around and note nothing bad is happening to me right now. And a friend of mine came round incredibly agitated. This was about 15 years ago. And she was telling me all about the daughter and the son-in-law and the wedding and the cousins and the rolling pin and I was getting the whole story. And I said, what can you hear? And she carried on talking about the story. I said, what can you hear? And after about 5 goes, she said, I can hear the washing machine in the neighbour's flat. I said, what else can you hear? And she just kept naming things she could hear. And then about 5 minutes later, she started laughing. So that's something I practice. What is actually happening now? Is anything bad happening to me right now? Is anything dangerous happening to me right now? And the answer has never been yes. The answer has been, right now, everything is fine. Next week, forget it. But right now, everything is absolutely fine. The second thing is to have playlists on your phone. Spotify, I find, is great for this. AA does not officially endorse Spotify, nor do I. This is a personal recommendation, but it's great for playlists of music which calms me down. The app Insight Timer, again, no endorsement, but is very good playlists and tracks to which are literally designed to soothe brain waves. I don't know the neuroscience, but frequencies which are more likely to induce peace and calm. I have those available. I have spiritual books on my phone so that whatever circumstance I'm in, I've got something. When I go on a plane, I always take a physical book with spiritual stuff in it in case my phone dies. I never leave myself in a position where I don't have materials that I can go to and say, God, speak through this, because I am completely insane right now. And note that I haven't said phone someone. If I phone someone in that state, what I'm going to do by verbalizing the narrative is make it more real for me. So I go straight to God first and calm down, and then I'll talk to someone. But I've got to go to God first, or I'll go in with my case that I've built for why I'm entitled to my bitterness. And then, because I've already made up my mind, I'm going to repel anything anyone says to try to help me. And I will shop around until I get someone who agrees with me that their behaviour is outrageous and I need to not be a doormat and stand up for myself and all of that crap. So I need to go to God first. And it's taken me years to do this, to learn how to calm the F down. Because sometimes it's 4 o'clock in the morning when it hits, and one needs to be prepared for that. What else have we got? A few more minutes. Very good. Sometimes it's hard to recognise if it's self-will or my higher power. What are tips I can use to help see the difference? So when ideas come down the tubes to me from whatever source, I can test the ideas against the principles of the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. And if you're around for longer and you've got time to look at them, the 12 concepts. The 12 traditions are super helpful in looking at my relations with other people. The concepts are super helpful if I'm working within an organisation. Almost every problem I've experienced in an organisation boils down to problems of authority and responsibility. And this is precisely what the concepts are there to regulate. And I'll give you a practical example. To the questions I can ask myself in relation to an idea using the traditions. Tradition 1, does my idea promote unity or division? Tradition 2, am I about to make a decision which involves other people, where I'm not asking them? Tradition 3, am I imposing requirements on other people? Am I requiring other people to conform to what I think should be the case? Tradition 4, am I interfering in someone else's behaviour, in someone else's life when I shouldn't be? Tradition 5, am I focusing on something trivial or looking at something important? Tradition 6, not lending my name to an outside property, money, prestige. Do I feel my identity is tied up in this question? Do I feel my image of myself in the world is on the line here? Tradition 7, am I fully self-supporting through my own contributions? Am I looking to rely on someone else or get someone else to rely on me when they should be looking after themselves and I should be looking after me? And you can go through the rest of the traditions like that. I didn't learn the traditions by going to workshops on the traditions and doing workbooks. I learned about them by taking them and literally applying them, saying, how does this tradition apply in this situation? How does this concept apply in this situation? Those principles are there as benchmarks against which I can measure whether my action, my proposed action, is right or wrong. But some very quick ways of doing it. If I feel emotionally involved in the situation, beware. If I'm emotionally attached to a particular outcome, beware. In a period of delusion many years ago, I said to my sponsor, I thought I was doing God's will. And he said, look at this question. Is my planned action for the good of all? And I recognised as soon as he said that I'd been in self-will. Because I had a plan and I didn't care what effect it had on other people. How does one remember to turn to a higher power through the day? If I set up the day and then close it with prayer. For me, it's a couple of things. It's a matter of routine. And when I have a break at lunchtime, I usually listen to something. Rather than just getting into the gossip by the water machine, I listen to something spiritual. And that brings me back. The second thing is having lots of contact with sponsees during the day on WhatsApp and whatever. That reminds me that there is a program, that there is a higher power. But the third thing is a wonderful line from page 87 where it says, when agitated or doubtful, in other words, any emotional disturbance, any indecision, any uncertainty, go to God and ask for the right thought or action. And the way I get a habit built in to my life is simply to practice it. And there's no I don't think there's any other way. How do I not have doubts and keep questioning a higher power, as my brain is very logical and it can't make total sense? And I'm going to finish on this, and then we'll have a little pray up, as they say in East London sometimes. St. Augustine, or Augustine story, depending on whether you're Catholic or Protestant. The story is he was walking along the beach and he sees a child who is taking a cup from the ocean, a cup of water, and pouring it into a hole in the ground. And Augustine says to the child, "Why are you doing that, you stupid child?" And the child said, "I'm trying to get the ocean into this hole in the beach." And Augustine says to the child, "That's ridiculous. The ocean is very, very big and the hole is very, very small. You can't possibly do it." And he said, "No more stupid than you trying to understand God. God is very, very big and you are very, very small. So I'm not gonna successfully pull back the curtain and reveal the secrets of the universe. This is why it says in step 11, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. That means the only bit I get to know with any certainty is, what does God want me to do today? And I think God wants me to close with the serenity prayer now. So let's close with the serenity prayer. Thank you for listening so patiently. So, using the word God as you do or don't understand it. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.